Great. Okay, so we are going to get started. So today, this is the 5th in a series of farm to school webinars that we've been doing this year, kind of doing a 101 on really hot topics in the farm to school world. And today's webinar, we're focusing on buying local protein, which is a very exciting thing. We have a couple of great guest speakers, and we're going to cover the most important information, the things we get asked about the most on this topic. So let's go to the next slide. And because we can't see all of you, it would be great if you can introduce yourselves if you haven't already in the chat. You can share your name, your location, and your role in farm to school. And we are also going to use the Q&A function of Zoom to be able to ask questions. So you can feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar, and we're going to have a time for Q&A specifically at the end after we have our presenters share. So if anything occurs to you during their presentations, if you go to that little more section and hit Q&A, that helps us track the questions, and I'll kind of keep track of them, and we'll make sure to try to leave some time at the end so we can get to those questions. And you can use the chat function if you want to communicate something to everybody, but the Q&A is good if you want to make sure that we have that waiting for the Q&A section. I guess I'll introduce myself too. So I'm Erin McKee. I'm the Community Food Systems Program Director at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. And I do some technical assistance of the MDA Farm to School grantees. So I'm super excited to be seeing all of you today. If we go to the next slide, this is what we're going to be covering in today's webinar. So we'll identify ourselves. You'll know some people that you can turn to with questions going forward. We're going to talk about some food safety and other requirements about serving local meat in school meals. We'll talk about where you might find local farms and processors and planning for how you might put those local proteins in your menu. We'll hear from a school sharing experience about how it's worked for her district and what kinds of items they're using in their meals. And then we will have that time for Q&A at the end. And again, if you have any questions as things come up, please share them in the Q&A or the chat as we go forward. So let's go to the next slide. As we get into this, this was just very interesting as we look at the purchases made by MDA Farm to School grantees. We have seen that local protein purchases have become more and more popular, and you can see there are a lot of different items. Turkey has been the most popular, but we do see a lot of purchases of beef as well, and pork and eggs. And so as there's been more interest in local protein, we wanted to make sure that we had this information available for all of you to do your own planning, since this is a very popular way to do local purchasing for your meals. So with that, I will pass it over to Kate to share a little bit about how this works with the Farm to School grants from MDA.
Thanks, Erin, and hi, everyone. I'm Kate Seybold. I'm the Regional Marketing Specialist and Farm to School Lead at Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And so a part of my work is getting to work on our Farm to School grant, along with all of you, and providing technical assistance and support with the grant program. So I know that many of you, I recognize your names and things, have been on our previous webinars. So I won't spend too much time on this, but we just wanted to give a quick refresher to kind of ground ourselves in today's webinar around allowable food items and sources if you have a fiscal year 2023 Farm to School grant. So as a reminder, if you do have one of those grants, you can be buying local food directly from farms, through food hubs or aggregators, through distributors, etc. It's really up to you. The most important thing is that that food be either grown or raised in Minnesota, and that it meet the requirements of unprocessed or minimally processed, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But here, just a reminder that there's also this grant really is placing a priority on thinking about how we support socially disadvantaged farmers and small businesses. That's a goal of MDA's Farm to School Grant Program, as well as the USDA's Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement Program, which is providing the funding for this year. So I really encourage you, as you're connecting with farmers, to consider how you may be able to work with socially disadvantaged farmers or small businesses. Perhaps they're ones you're already working with, or thinking about how you can reach out and make new connections with farmers in our state. And just a quick requirement that you will, for the items that you purchase for this grant, you will be required to report on that farm name and where it's located, and answer a few demographic questions. So if you go to the next slide, then I'll just do a quick review of when we're talking about unprocessed and minimally processed. What does that mean for local proteins? You can be buying poultry, beef, pork, bison, etc. It can be ground, even pre-pattied. A really key thing here is that it needs to be uncooked. So you could be buying uncooked sausage and brats, as long as there's just minimal seasoning being added to it, no fillers. You also can be buying eggs. Things that would not be eligible for your fiscal year 2023 grants would be brats that have like additional kind of main ingredients added to it. So for instance, brats with wild rice or brats with cheese. No hot dogs or like already roasted or smoked meat products. And again, just a reminder that this is specific to the fiscal year 2023 grants, and you are not limited to purchase these outside of your grant. So if you have, if you're planning to spend additional, department funds on local foods, you can certainly be buying these things listed in the no column. This is just specific for that fiscal year 2023 grant, which does have different requirements than past MDA Farm to School grant cycles. Next slide. So if you've been on previous webinars, these are many of the same points, but just wanted to kind of reiterate these again. There's a lot of different ways to find local farms. So again, a plug for the Minnesota Grown Wholesale Directory. This is a searchable directory or database of Minnesota grown members who are interested or have experience selling wholesale. So you can go on there and you could search, beef or poultry or turkey. You can filter based on your area or a certain radius that you're looking to buy within. So a great starting point if you're just kind of trying to get a sense for what farms are around you. I'd also encourage you to, do some research. Who are the farms in your area that are selling at local farmers markets? You can also reach out to local farm or food organizations near you who might have connections with farmers. So one example is the Minnesota Cattlemen's Association has regional chapters. Connecting with them may be a way to find local beef in your area. One of the best ways, though, I think, is to ask around. So where are other schools near you buying from? Where are perhaps restaurants buying from? Or connecting with county-based extension educators, your local public health SHIP coordinators, your local farm service agency office. All of these people may have connections with farmers in your area. As I mentioned, you can buy from food hubs or aggregators as well as distributors. So keep that in mind as a way to connect with farmers, perhaps be able to source from multiple farms all at once. And the MDA has started a list of beef producers who are interested in working with schools. This is just kind of an informal list based on outreach we've been doing, since I know that many schools right now are looking for local beef suppliers or other local proteins. So we do have that as just a Google Doc, and I'd be happy to share it with you, and feel free to connect with me. We can also include it in the follow-up after this webinar that we'll send out by email. And then the next slide, I think, is just the websites of where you can find local processors. So USDA inspected facilities, the USDA has a list and a map, and then MDA has the Minnesota State Equal To plants. And Jane is going to get into more detail about what that means, but just wanted to have these links in the PowerPoint as well, since we'll be sharing that out. And these are places where you can be looking for local processors as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Jane Jewett from Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, who has some fantastic information to share with you about everything you need to know when kind of thinking about what are the requirements or kind of regulations around purchasing local protein. So to you, Jane.
Thanks, Kate. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so these are the marks of inspection that will be seen on meat that is slaughtered and processed under continuous inspection, which is what is legally required for schools to purchase it. So the three on the left are all USDA marks. So starting from left to right here, the USDA mark for red meat is the first one. Poultry is the next one. It has that little P down there. The triangle indicates what USDA refers to as non-amenable species. That would be historically wild game species like bison or elk. If those are processed at a USDA plant, they're going to have that triangle on the package. And then anything processed at a Minnesota Equal To plant is going to have that outline of the state of Minnesota as its inspection mark. So any package box of meat that a school purchases should have one of these marks on it. So what does that inspection mean? So USDA or Minnesota Equal To mean similar things in terms of continuous inspection. The Minnesota program is authorized by USDA to be run by the state of Minnesota. So that's why it's equal to USDA within the boundaries of the state of Minnesota. And continuous inspection under either of those programs means that there is an inspector present at the plant on every day of operations. That inspector is looking at every animal before it's slaughtered to make sure that the animal appears healthy. The inspector is looking at every carcass and the internal organs after the animal is slaughtered. And if they detect any signs of disease, then that animal is condemned and does not enter the food supply. The inspector is also checking on operating conditions at the plant every day that they are there. They're reviewing the plant's written records. They're looking at worker safety, verifying that equipment is clean and in good repair. If they notice an issue with the machine, they're going to tag it, and then the plant has to clean or fix that machine before they can use it again. And then there's a regular sampling and testing schedule for microbes to verify that the control practices at the plant are actually working. So all of these things ensure the safety of the meat coming out of any of these inspected plants, whether they're a very tiny plant or one of the really huge ones. There are traceability requirements for any entity that's operating in the food supply chain. So as a school, you would have requirements to trace one step forward and one step back. So one step forward is who is eating the food, and that would be the students, of course, and the staff potentially. And the school would have a record of, who's taking school lunch. One step back would be who sold you the food. So whether that's the farmer themselves or a food hub or another aggregator, that's your one step back. You don't have to go more than one step back. Like if you know who sold you the food, then that's your one step back. And then records beyond that are not your responsibility. Except for this particular grant, you do have to know who the farmers are who supplied the product. But you don't have to know all the details, the nitty-gritty of how that meat moved through the processing plant itself. So lot numbers are on packages in addition to those marks of inspection. And the lot numbers are how the meat or poultry processing plant documents the movement of products from when the live animal enters the door of the plant to when packages go out the other end to be sold. So those lot numbers are typically changed whenever there's a clean break, when machines are emptied of product and cleaned out and the plant is cleaned. And at the very large plants, there can be multiple lots in a day. And at the very small plants, it may be one single lot for a day because there just isn't enough volume of product moving through to justify more than one lot number per day. For federal commodity beef that schools may be familiar with, that's coming through the USDA programs to schools, a lot is defined as 10,000 pounds of trim that comes off of a beef animal. That represents at least 25 whole beef animals in a single lot. And so some of our smaller plants in Minnesota are able to do single animal lots or single day lots that are going to represent way fewer head of animals than that. Here are some examples of what lot numbers could look like. So at a very small plant where there's one lot number for the whole day, they could just use the date. Then the package labels are also going to include the name and the establishment number of that plant and that market inspection. And the plant's internal records, what the inspector looks at, are going to record which animals from which sources were slaughtered on that day. Here's another example of a small plant that's just using a little bit different numbering system. The first 4 digits are the plant's identification number. In the Minnesota Equal To system, it's a 4-digit number, and then 2 digits for the year. And then the last 3 digits represent the Julian date, which is the date numbered sequentially 1 through 365. So in a non-leap year, this means that this product was processed on October 6th of 2020. And then large and very large plants, or even some medium-sized ones, may use a QR code system, which would be an automated way for plants to track things internally within their operations without having to do manual record keeping. So that's an operational decision that the plants would make depending on what they can afford for their system, how much labor they have available to do record keeping. A QR code is nice, but it's not a requirement. Another thing that's not a requirement is a CN label, and that can surprise people because CN labels are really common. It stands for Child Nutrition Label, and it's something that the USDA authorizes and allows to be on packages of proteins for schools. Typically, manufacturers that are doing a combination product, like a breaded chicken patty, for instance, will have a CN label that shows how much of that product contributes to the meat or meat alternate requirement versus how much is breading that would not qualify as meat or meat alternate. So USDA allows those to be used by manufacturers. It's a convenience for schools. It's a convenience for manufacturers. It's not a requirement. The USDA does not require those CN labels. They're really common on a lot of products that schools get, but they're not common on local raw meat and poultry products. So you may not see them on local proteins coming into schools, and that's legal. There is a food buying guide published by the Food and Nutrition Service of the USDA. It's searchable online, and it lists in the meat and meat alternate section many products. And especially for some of the local products that are going to be raw, relatively unprocessed, they're likely to have a listing in that food buying guide. And then you can use that information in the guide to determine yields based on serving quantities. Another thing that's not required to be on labels of product that you buy locally is the fat percentage or a nutrition label. That food buying guide includes information on raw ground meats and poultry at different fat percentages, so you can use that information to determine quantities to purchase for X number of servings. But small entities with fewer than 10 employees or fewer than 10,000 package units per product are exempt from having to include nutrition labels on their products. So you may not see a fat percentage listed on the label of local product, which means that a school may have to do a little bit of a cooking test to determine what the fat percentage actually is of the product they're buying. But then you can use that searchable food buying guide on the USDA website to find the other information you need on portioning. So here are some screenshots from that. It allows you to choose different nutrition programs. There are a number of them, but this is the CACFP, Child and Adult Food Program, lunch and supper, and I put in ground beef as the key words, and the meal component is meats and meat alternates. And it pulls up a whole bunch of things on ground beef at different fat percentages, but here's the example for an 80-20 product, 80% lean, no more than 20% fat. And it shows what the servings are per pound for a 1 ounce serving size or a 1.5 ounce serving size. So 80-20, I think, is what schools are probably the most accustomed to, but the food buying guide includes other options as well. And this 90-10 is likely to be more typical of what you would get with local beef. Probably a little bit leaner. And so this shows, you get 12.1 servings per pound of a 1 ounce cooked lean meat if it's 90-10. So that information allows you to do the serving and portions calculations that a school might ordinarily do off of the CN label. Another thing that we've seen come up around local meats is extra E. coli testing. That is not required for local purchases of local meats. The commodity meats program for schools is run by extremely large plants that are commingling very large numbers of animals into the trim that is made into ground beef. And therefore the USDA does have additional lot testing requirements for E. coli, but in the local purchasing situation, that's not required. You're not looking at such extensive commingling, and we've had a determination from the Food Safety and Inspection Service of the USDA that that extra testing is not required for local purchases. Transporting of frozen meats and poultry products. So how is it getting to the schools from the farmers or the aggregators? Minnesota's general food laws specify that frozen foods must be stored at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below and can be transported with temps not exceeding 10 degrees above Fahrenheit. So that has been part of a discussion with the Department of Agriculture, which has agreed that frozen meats and poultry can be transported in clean, sealed, and insulated containers like a camping cooler, as long as that temperature during delivery doesn't exceed 10 degrees Fahrenheit and delivery time outside of mechanical refrigeration is limited. And the definition of limited is not extremely well defined. That's something that schools could have a conversation with their suppliers about, but generally it's intended to be not a terribly long time, like definitely less than 4 hours and depending on, the ambient air temperature outside, maybe quite a bit shorter. So, maybe like half an hour to an hour of delivery time, which would be fairly normal for a really local purchase by a school. Okay, how about eggs? Schools can use shell eggs for any purpose when they're serving children who are older than preschool age. If a school is including preschool children in their food service, like if there's an early childhood or Head Start program that is being served meals by the school food service, those preschool children are considered a highly susceptible population, and pasteurized eggs need to be used for most uses for those kids. And there are no small-scale local pasteurized egg producers in Minnesota. It's a really intense, expensive process to pasteurize eggs in the shell or to make a liquid pasteurized egg product. So if you are purchasing shell eggs locally, they need to be reserved for kids older than preschool. Egg labeling requirements. So local eggs sold to schools must be handled the same way as eggs sold to any other licensed entity. So they must be graded, candled, and labeled. And the label has to include the package contents, the pack date in that Julian date format, numbered 1 to 365 for each day of the year, the use by date in the more common day, month, year format, the name and address of the farmer, and a safe handling notice, which says, eggs are perishable, keep refrigerated. Eggs have to be kept at 45 degrees or below throughout storage and delivery. But just like with frozen meat, eggs can be delivered in those cleaned, sealed, insulated containers with ice packs to maintain 45 degrees or lower. Eggs cannot be in contact with raw ice, like naked ice cubes. It has to be a sealed pack so that there can't be melt water getting on the eggs. And again, the time outside of mechanical refrigeration must be limited. So keep those transport times short. All right, that is the end of my section on food safety for school proteins. And Kate, you're going to introduce the next folks.
Thanks so much, Jane. Really helpful information. And again, we will be sending this presentation out. And so when we do that, I suggest you save these slides. There's really, really helpful information on them. So next, I'm going to introduce Sara George from Renewing the Countryside and the Farmers Market Hub Project, and I believe the Farmers Market too. So Sarah is going to share a little bit about planning and kind of how some strategies that schools can use for planning and working with farmers to have a successful relationship. So I will pass it to you, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Kate. I just want to confirm that you all can hear me. I'm having a little struggle with Zoom this afternoon.
We can hear you.
Can you? Great, great. So now you've heard about food safety and requirements when you're buying your local meat, and you understand what purchases you can make. So I want to talk you through a little bit about the things you can plan when you're making your local food purchases for protein. Protein is a lot different than making those purchases for fruits and vegetables. So you're going to have to be planning these orders out ahead of time. There's things to consider, like your butcher schedule and quantities, that transportation and how frequently you want delivery. Because oftentimes, if you're going to be placing an order for, let's say that you want 1,000 pounds of hamburger ground beef on a monthly basis, do you want that delivered in 250-pound increments every week? Do you have refrigerator or do you have freezer space for 1,000 pounds once a month? And so you have to think through what your a facility can hold, so in your refrigeration or freezer space, but also how much your local farmer can provide for you. So thinking through what they have available on the field for animals, talking with your local farmer and finding out what their butcher dates are. Oftentimes I've heard that butcher dates can be as far as a year out right now. So having them consider what those butcher dates are and thinking through how much you typically go through on a monthly basis. Have you pre-ordered commodities? Do you want to use this in addition to your commodities? Is this going to replace your commodities? And how's that going to look? In several of the communities that I'm working in, you can see in the photo here that I had an opportunity to not only meet the staff, not only plan things ahead, but meet the staff so that as I'm working with the food service director, I could also then see the staff. My face was a familiar face. Making sure that when you're making that delivery, you want to know where you're going to go, who you're going to go to, what fridge and freezer it's going to be put into. I like to plan ahead on a spreadsheet and know that things can change. But when it changes with beef or any protein, it's really important to reach out to the producer because they also don't have the freezer space that you're looking for. So on this particular order that you see on the screen, there's some items that were listed in red. This was an order that was edited in November. The order number went up or went down, excuse me, but in December, the order was increased so that we could have the same order quantity going all the way across the year. And I wanted to make sure that the butcher, the farmer, and the school were all aware of those changing quantities. Something that you need to think about as you're making these plans is telling package sizing. So are we going to be talking, do we want all of our ground beef in 10-pound rolls? Do we want it in 20-pound rolls? And making sure that you are identifying your expectations for the butcher, because that's something that needs to not only go to the hubs, go to the farmer, but it also needs to be transposed over to the butcher as they're doing that. If you're ordering patties, hamburger patties, chicken patties, any boneless chicken, those things need to be informed to everyone involved in the process as well. One thing I've noticed in the past where I'm going to call out where we've gotten stuck is that the hamburger patties were placed, somebody wanted, excuse me, I'm going to back up. My farmer was identifying that they had hamburger patties in 10-pound packages. And the school had to do the math, knowing that those patties were 2.5 ounces. They had to multiply the 2.5 ounces to find out that there was like 6.7 patties per pound. And from the poundage, then multiply the 6.7 times the 10 pounds. So making sure that you identify, like if you're going to order a package of patties, identify how many patties are in that package. Or schools, you can let the farmer know, this is how many I need. Farmers, if you identify it by the patties and not by the pound, that makes things a lot more simple to do. Keep in mind that as you're going through those package sizes and altering things and laying out those cutting expectations, there probably will be a higher price for those specifications because they're making those changes for you. Especially when it comes to, let's say, boneless chicken. Just when you go to the grocery store to get boneless chicken for your table, and there is more cost for that, the same thing would be true for your local farmer because they're going to have to ask their local butcher to help debone that chicken for you. So I think it's really important that you have that conversation. Now, as you're planning these orders, the one thing I do want to raise awareness of is that not only are you going to be planning the dates that you'd like those to arrive, but you also want to talk about that delivery expectation. Do you want the times that you're going to be accepting those deliveries? Oftentimes, schools are clearly gone by 2 o'clock, but farmers aren't always aware of that. And so saying, you know, if we can have this, and I prefer it on a Monday or a Tuesday versus asking for that on a Friday. Sorry about that. And making sure that that's in there. and having that. If you want to go to the next slide, it's just a fun photo of us at the Lake City School here while we were making a delivery with some local apples. I know that it was really exciting for us when we were making some of these deliveries to see the students and go in and meet the staff. And it was really nice for us to have the plan in place, knowing where, if you have multiple schools in a facility, in one community, knowing that this much is going to go to this school, this much is going to go to this school. If there's a special door that you're going to be entering or exiting, that needs to be communicated. So oftentimes you're not going to be making these deliveries through the front door of the school. You're going to be going through delivery door, whatever. And you want to identify what that process is so that your delivery driver is confident in knowing that they're helping you do the right thing and getting things in place. I'm actually going to ask if I could bring on Jill at this time so that we can talk through, because Jill is on the screen here, and maybe we can talk through some of the things that Jill and I have done as we're working with different farmers in our area. So is Jill around? I can't see anything, so I'm going to let you go, Kate. Is Jill with us?
Jill is here. So yeah, so we have Jill from Lake City Schools, the food service director there through Lunchtime Solutions. So thank you, Jill, for being here. And I know you work really closely with Sara, so I will pass it to you, but the thought was just that Jill and Sara work really closely together, and that Jill can share a little bit about Lake City's experience with buying local proteins, kind of how they've decided how to buy local protein and what to buy, and some of the things that they've learned along the way. So yeah, feel free to unmute Jill and take it away.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. So I started purchasing local meats 3 years ago with Sara. I started purchasing turkey burgers and turkey hot dogs from Ferndale out of Cannon Falls. And I've moved on to purchasing local beef and ham, actually. And how I decide what I purchase is kind of Sara lets me know what's available. I talk to other farmers, to all the farmers that I use, to see what's available, or I use the website on her local hub. Has a website that we go on to purchase things, and they list things every week for us. But I choose things that I can use on my menu or in recipes. The ham that we purchase currently, we use on sandwiches, and we also, it's thin enough to be on sandwiches, but it's also like just thick enough to use to chop up into like scalloped potatoes and ham and casseroles like that. Also, sorry. One of the questions that was asked that I need to answer is training staff, how we get them on board with the local farm to school products, and which can be difficult. We have in Lake City, we have a seasoned staff. They've been there for many years. They're used to using the same products every day. So when you switch things up on them, they can get kind of grumpy about it. So one of the challenges we've had with using the local ground beef is it has a lower fat content, so it doesn't crumble as easy as it would as if we ordered it from Cisco or with a higher fat content. So some of the things that we've done, we did do a cooking, a test cook, I would guess I would call it here. A chef had came in from Rochester to show us how to do it in our tilt skillet, which we do not usually use. So what he had shown us is to add water to it into the tilt skillet with the hamburger. And then you kind of can just close it up and forget about it for a little bit. But crumble every 5-10 minutes and check on it. And then just basically drain the water and the grease out and have a finished product. How he had done it is he had put it on, we measured it out with quart actually it was a gallon container, and we had put it out on sheet pans, and then we put those sheet pans on a rack and cooled them down, and then once they were cooled down, then we packaged, I think it was into 10-pound increments, froze them so they were ready for our recipes. The recipes we use usually are by a 10-pound increment. Other challenges that I've seen not using this product, different product, is not only with staff, but sometimes the students need persuading that this is a good product too. So we do some sampling in Lake City and letting them know, like for the ham, sometimes it doesn't look like the ham that they're used to eating from the store or even from us beforehand, because it's not processed, it's not loaded with all of the nitrates, or it's just ham. So it changes color, it doesn't look the same, it's not as thin, it can be crumbly sometimes. But just to let them taste that and let them know that that's okay, and it's because it's coming from a local farmer, I think is huge and important to get the students on board as well. So which brings me to promoting that we use local farms. Some of the things that we have done and in Lake City is we made signs. So when, let's say we're making tater tot hot dish and using local beef, we'll put a sign above the serving line saying this, this menued item is using local beef. Or if we're using ham in the sandwiches, we'll do it above the sandwiches, stuff like that. But we also use social media, pictures of the students eating the product, asking the students what they think of the product and adding that into our social media posts. We use signs that the farmers have provided us to post up. It's like pictures of the family and their farm, so students can see who they're supporting or who the whole school is supporting. I think that's important too. And then I had said before, we do sampling. That's huge for us. You can explain where that product came from, and the students can taste it before they take it for the day. And they're more apt to do that with the sampling. And then also just presentations. I have to do school board presentations, and I make it known that we source a lot of our protein from local farmers, and everyone's on board and loves that. So I think that I covered everything. If I didn't, let me know, but it's been a really good program. Partnering with Sara and the hub has been awesome, and it's been easy to order, and it makes it easy to connect with farmers too. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I think you did cover everything, but I feel like if people have questions, please do add them into that Q&A section, and we can get to those as well. I feel like it's so powerful just to hear the real life experience of how these products are being used, and to hear from both sides, both from the school and from Sara's perspective. sharing a little bit more from the farmer side, and Jane sharing all of the technical knowledge and expertise about the rules. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your perspectives today. I think we had a lot of really big picture takeaways from the resources about how to find local protein producers to those specific regulations for certain items, like local meat and poultry requirements, or requirements around shell eggs, which I had never heard that before. Somehow we've been working on this for a long time and I hadn't heard those requirements. So that was really, I keep learning in this world too. There's always more to learn. And I really love the ideas about planning ahead. It is a little, I think, as Sara said, it's different than when you're purchasing produce. There's a little more lead time to making sure to get on the schedule for making sure that that meat is going to be ready at the time that you're planning to serve it. So it's really important to be investing in those relationships, building those relationships ahead of time, and then making a plan together. I feel like this is really good information that we've heard from our partners today. We wanted to highlight, if we go to the next slide, so we've been talking about local protein, but if you haven't been joining our previous webinars, we just wanted to make sure that you all knew that there are resources, there are similar presentations on different topics that you can go back and watch the recordings of. We had one that was specifically for grantees who are new to getting a farm to school grant, so the First Bite webinar. We have one that's all about incorporating local items into your menus and doing menu planning and recipe, finding recipes or developing recipes using local products. And we had one on buying local produce specifically, where we get into what's different about local produce as opposed to the specifics about local protein. We did have a more 101 webinar about just buying local generally, and like the meal pattern requirements and the rules around purchasing and procurement. That is all located on this website here. So the farmtoschoolmn.org resources page has all of these webinars collected in one place for you. We did do one too that was directed towards a farm and food hub or distribution company audience. So if you have farmers who are asking you questions as a school and they don't really understand how to sell to schools, you could also direct them to that resource as well. And then we do have one more webinar, if we go to the next slide, remaining in this Farm to School 101 series that we've been doing. So we had our specific produce one, we had this one specifically about protein, and in our next one, we're going to be diving into other foods from around the tray. So talking about grains and dairy products and things like that haven't been covered in the protein and produce webinars so far. So if you're able to join us on May 17th, I think that will be a really good one to think about expanding your local purchasing if you want to get a little more creative and think about different ways that you might engage in local purchasing. And then we also did want to highlight on the next slide, in addition to these webinars where we have more formal presentations by experts like we had today, we have a more informal space where you can come and ask questions, and it's more of a discussion space where it's not only members of the Minnesota Farm to School and Farm to Early Care leadership teams, but also many other schools or early care providers or farmers or other support positions are on the line, and you can bring your specific questions and be able to talk through, like, oh, I'm having difficulty with this, the things that we're going to talk about in our Q&A right now, like I can't find any chicken producers. Does anyone have any ideas? And kind of troubleshoot together. And we've seen that also be a really powerful space for peer-to-peer learning. So if you register for that one time, it's a recurring meeting every month, and you can just join when it works for you. You're not committed to come every single time. But we wanted to make sure, since there hadn't been a point person or a space where you can go to ask questions, this is there for you every month, and different members of our teams will be there to answer questions. And speaking of which, I think we've had a few good questions coming through that I think we can look at now. And if you have more questions, please feel free to enter them into that Q&A, and then we'll get to as many as we can before we wrap up today. So one question that I think is great, and maybe this is good for Kate, someone had asked if there's a list of emerging farmers, of disadvantaged farmers, if they're trying to prioritize purchasing from emerging farmers. Is there a list of specific farmers, or how can they go about finding those emerging farmers to connect with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is that no, there isn't a specific list of socially disadvantaged or emerging farmers in the state. One resource that I'll put in the chat is the MDA does have a website with some strategies for connecting with emerging farmers. And just to clarify, so the MDA uses the term emerging farmers, which is very similar in definition to the USDA's term for socially disadvantaged farmers. So just to explain the different language being used, very similar. But so that website does provide some information and strategies around kind of how you can connect with emerging farmers. And there are many people and organizations listed on that can be that may be able to help you in that connection process. I think some of the resources, or more so strategies that I shared earlier, to apply to this as well, of just reaching out to different organizations and people in your community to just kind of start having those conversations is a really good starting place to connect with and find different diverse farmers in your community. So as you go through that process, if you take a look at some of the different organizations listed on the MDA website, or you have any questions about the process, or just want to have someone to talk through it with, I would be happy to connect with you. So please do reach out if there's anything I can do to help. And I will say, like, we recently started that Google Doc of beef producers that just kind of happened spontaneously as different schools were reaching out. And so I am kind of exploring the idea if we could be collecting some different farm names beyond just beef, in case that would be helpful for schools too. So stay tuned. It's an idea that I had today, and if you have any thoughts on that too, and you think it would be helpful, please let me know. But we're just really trying to think about how we can be most helpful to you and farmers in making those connections happen. So hopefully this is a helpful starting point of some of those suggestions of who you can connect with.
I think that is helpful. And I will say, like, I get questions like this about, is there a specific list of farmers? And my colleague Nora, who's also on the line today, and I have also talked about, like, oh, would it be possible to make just a concrete list or somehow identify farmers who are already selling to schools, for example, in the wholesale database or something like that. So I think, yeah, there's energy around trying to get a producer list, or like some leads, some concrete leads for all of you too. Great question. So there were two questions that I think Jane has answered by writing the answers, but I think that maybe others might be interested in hearing the answers too. And these were questions about processing rules. So one was about, can Minnesota equal to be sold to schools? Because there's some contradictory information going around that some people are saying they weren't allowed to serve or sell equal to schools. And then another similar question is, does slaughtering have to be at an equal to or USDA facility? Because that has come up as well. And Jane, would you be able to answer those questions?
Sure. Yep. So the first one about whether equal to inspected meat can be sold to schools. Yes, absolutely it can. If it's Minnesota equal to, has that state of Minnesota mark of inspection on the package, and it's being sold to a Minnesota school, equal to means equal to USDA within the state border, so that's totally fine. Slaughter, yes, slaughter must be done under continuous inspection and processing must be done under continuous inspection for any sales to schools. Because that means the inspector is present every day, has their eyes on what's going on. That's a key component of food safety.
Thank you, Jane. Straightforward answers from the experts on food safety here. So you can share that with those partners who were misinformed and let them know, because that is okay. That's great.
Yeah, I will pop a link to fact sheets into the chat as well, because if you need to persuade someone, there are fact sheets that have, you know, the Department of Agriculture logo on them and say very clearly that you can do this.
Perfect. I see Molly is asking, are there exceptions to the meat slaughtering and processing rules for tribal governments? Do you happen to know about that, Jane?
It's possible. If the tribe has its own food code that specifies different requirements and the tribal school is located on reservation land, then the tribe has sovereignty. They can set their own rules. Also, there's a provision that does allow wild harvested wild game that's a traditional Native American food to be donated to schools that serve more than 50% Native American children. So that would be a pathway also. That would be an exception.
Great, thank you. So Maria was wondering about finding local chicken providers, and they have already been looking at the Minnesota Wholesale Directory. Are there any other suggestions for where to find chicken producers? I don't know if that's a Kate question, or I think I'll open that up to anybody who has some ideas for Maria.
Well, I can get started with a few things, and then I don't know if Jane, if you have any thoughts, or if anyone else does. I think it can be open if anyone is a school here or a farmer here that is working with local chicken, feel free to put it in the chat or Q&A. Just a few that come to mind is I remember seeing recently that Minneapolis Public Schools was serving Catagen chicken. So I don't know if you've connected with Catagen, but that's one option. And another new operation at Tree Range Farms has chicken, and they have a new, I believe, USDA inspected facility actually in Iowa, but their chickens are being raised in Minnesota. Those are just two that I just happen to know off the top of my head, but if anyone else has thoughts, please do share them.
Yeah, I'll just add that poultry is really tough because there's a really, really tight bottleneck on the inspected slaughter and processing for poultry, even tighter than for red meat. It's just poultry slaughter and processing is a tough business to be in. It's not for the faint of heart. So there just aren't many of them, but there are a few. And so another suggestion would be to look at the list of processing plants that Kate put in the chat earlier, and contact the plant and say, hey, because the plants know who their farmers are, who are using them, right? So going through those processing plants and saying, hey, do you have any farmers who could supply chicken that you would process? Might be a way to pick up a little.
Thank you. I know we're just a little bit over time, but there's just one more question. So I will see if anyone has an answer to whether the buying guide is the best way to determine meeting the meat or meat alternate requirements when they're serving a whole roasted chicken. What do you think about that, my friend?
Erin, I just put a response in, so I did put the link, and to my knowledge, but please correct me if anybody knows additionally, that would be the best place. The link that I put, there's like 24 and 25 gives you kind of the estimated servings per whole chicken. I think meats and meat alternates and crediting, that's a harder one in general, I think is my sense. And Jill, you're very informed about these things and much more informed than I, so please chime in if I'm wrong or if you have anything to add.
I'm actually really lucky. I work for Lunchtime Solutions and they have their own compliance officer. So any questions like that, I send my email out and get an answer back in usually a half hour. So that's how I do it. But yeah, that's all I have.
Nice. There was one other question, Jill, about what is the hub that you were referring to?
So we use the Wabasha Farmers Market Hub. And so that's what Sara runs or whatever. And when I say like, I go in and do my order on there, just like I would for Cisco. I put in how much I want when I need it. That's where I list my instructions on what door to be delivered to, how many I want to go to the high school, how many I want to go to the elementary school. It's really a easy website to use.
Sara, do you want?
And I would love to, yeah. So this is the Farmers Market Hub, and you can find us at www.farmersmarkethub.org. I'm sure somebody's already put that in the chat. But on that hub, you're going to see that we have 10 farmers market hubs across the state. We're hoping that we can get more hubs, but what this is it's kind of like the Amazon of local food. So you can see a list of, in Wabasha, for example, we have 21 farmers that are listing their product live. Not only can you see what they have available, but you can see the pricing. You're going to be able to purchase from multiple farms in one shopping cart, just like you do on Amazon. Only better because it's local food, right? You're going to get one invoice, one delivery, and you can do your shopping all online like you do with Fix and Cisco. And it makes it really easy for us to have access to our local producers. The interesting thing is for the Food Hub project that we are doing is that when it comes to proteins, we open up separate order cycles and plan ahead for those protein orders. And we do that so that our producers can plan on those orders as they come through. So you don't want to place an order on the online storefront and say, look, I want to order, 1,000 pounds of chicken and bring me 200 pounds a month. Actually, that's going to be an opportunity for you to sit down with that market manager, hub manager, and have that conversation. So yeah, but it makes it nice and easy for you to place orders and find your local producers.
And this is the last question. I know we're over time, but Kim is asking if you do use a hub, is information available there regarding whether farmers are disadvantaged or small farmers for that tracking purpose?
That's a great question. And that, again, is going to be something that you can just work with. The cool thing here is for Jill, I'm going to use Jill and I as an example. So down here in Southeast Minnesota, Jill is able to say, hey, Sara, I have this form that needs to be filled out. I purchased from 2 farmers last month. Can you get the results for me and send it in? So instead of Jill having to reach out to each of the 21 farmers that are on the platform, it's going to be me. I'm going to be that in between that's going to be helping coordinate not only the pickups and the deliveries, but I'm also going to be the one pulling all of the paperwork, managing the payments, not only to each individual farmer, but accepting the payments from Jill. And that payment piece is one thing I totally skipped over. But later on, next time, make sure that payments, when you're meeting with your local producers, have that conversation. Sometimes schools can be 6 weeks, net 30, net 15, maybe farmers need it in net 10, and be sure to have that conversation. But for us, Jill and I, we have an open relationship, texting when it's an emergency, emailing if it's a question that can be answered within the week. I step by and see how things are going over there. And it's really nice that we can have that relationship. I'm not stopping any relationship with any of the other farmers. I'm just encouraging it and making it easier to make all of that happen.
So great. Well, this was a very rich conversation, and I want to thank again our guest presenters today for sharing all of your expertise. This was great. Thank you to our attendees for your great questions too. And we will send a follow-up email with a link to the recording of the webinar today and with some of the resources that have been mentioned as well. And if you have more questions, you want to get deeper into your specific situations, please do sign up for that office hour and join us, and we can try to help you walk through and troubleshoot any issues that might come up too. But this was really wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Have a great day.